Whenever I see a taboo, I just think that there's something we need to drag screaming into the light and discuss. Because taboos are where our fears live, and taboos are things that just keep us tiny, particularly for women. A quote from journalist and broadcaster Caitlin Moran. Julia Mossbridge PhD is a renowned cognitive neuroscientist who has spent years unraveling the complexities of human perception and cognition, particularly in context considering taboo and fear. On today's show, Julia discussed working with taboo and fear and what does cognitive neuroscience tell us. We explore the UAP subject through the lens of gender and neurodiversity as well, examining how our gender and brain function influence our learning, perception, and communication of information. Join us as we get rebelliously curious. Julia, thank you so much for joining me on Rebelliously Curious. I had the pleasure of meeting you this year at SCU. You were a speaker, a presenter, and the topic that you were speaking to on and presenting to us was about working with taboo and fear and what does cognitive neuroscience teach us in conjunction with the UAP field and topic. I'm so happy I came across your work. I'm so happy that I was able to meet you. You're such a lovely human being and so wonderful in real life.
Thank you.
I think the work that you're doing is so important from both an emotional perspective, a cognitive perspective, but an better understanding of self and how humans relate to this unbelievable phenomenon that we're trying to figure out. So first of all, I'd like to start off by saying thank you too for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you. Thanks for being a person who's going after understanding and wisdom. It's pretty important.
Trying to and understand myself and others attached to this phenomenon. And I think we really did see that at SCU. You know, I will say this before asking you questions. You were the first speaker the first day outside of Ross Coulthard. That was like the obviously our keynote speaker that day. But you really opened up SCU, and whoever curated the speakers did a fabulous job. I think that was Rich Huffman who did that. But you really opened up the conference with love and heart. And I think that was so important. And you set such a tone for how we would connect, maybe how the conference would go. And I felt that to the end of it, I actually saw you the last moment when we were all at the airport, and it just resonated throughout all of it. So I thank you for that, because I think conferences have different feels every time you go to them. The last time I was at SCU, you know, someone joked around and that we had all of UFO royalty there, you know, from George Knapp, Jeremy Corbell, David Grush was there as well, which we didn't know at that time that he was going to be a whistleblower. So there was all these wonderful people, and there still was this year, but there was a different way of connecting, I felt, this year than there was the years before. And I really feel that you laid the groundwork for that. So thank you for doing that. And as a woman, thank you very much too.
Thank you. That was my entire goal. I was honored to be invited to a conference in a field that I don't know much about, and I'm just learning. But I do know about what works in terms of human interaction.
Yeah, and you did such a fabulous job. And I recommend people, if they can, listen to your talk, because it was wonderful and it's so important to this work. So with that said, how did you get yourself involved in the UFO subject? What drew you to researching and understanding the phenomenon from a neurological perspective?
I'm mostly trying to understand, just to correct that a little bit, I'm mostly trying to understand humans in our discovery process from a neurocognitive perspective. And this is a discovery process, particularly in terms of the phenomenon, that is transformational, not just on an individual level, but transformational culturally, societally. You know, the entire world is going through a revolution where we're like, what is our relationship? The key question is, what is our relationship with whatever these are? And it doesn't kind of matter whether UAP represent, or the visible aspects of UAP represent secret government programs, or whether they represent aliens from another planet or ourselves from the future or little fairies that are dancing around. I mean, honestly, like, it doesn't matter. There are these things that are being seen and experienced. And what is our relationship with them? Like, I know my relationship with a pencil. I know my relationship with a computer. I don't know what my relationship is with these things. And that's a major shift in the modern era, in which we have to admit we don't understand.
We don't. And you really speak heavily about taboo and ridicule and fear within this topic and how it hinders us. Can you break down just for, people probably have a good understanding of what fear is, but from your perspective, and you've done so much research on this with and looked at other people's research, how do you define taboo and how do you define fear?
Yeah, good questions. Thank you. Um, Fear is actually a motivational emotion. So emotions in general are really beautiful shortcuts that nature has given us to make behaviors streamlined. So when you're afraid, immediately you have multiple possibilities. You can freeze, you could fight, you could flee, right? These are the things that you could do when you're afraid. But the emotion itself is a motivational force that helps you try to find safety. It's trying to move you to safety, to change your behavior so you're feeling safe. The thing to know is there's also this kind of dysfunctional fear that is really prevalent, especially in anxiety disorders. I'm not a clinical psychologist, but I can see that dysfunctional fear is where you have the fear, it's motivating you to change or do something, but even if you change or do that thing, you still don't feel safe. Or you have the fear, it's not motivating you to change or do something, and you consistently don't feel safe. So dysfunctional fear can drive the development of taboo. And then let's talk about what taboo is. So taboo is this culturally agreed upon idea that you should not say, do, or even experience certain things, whatever the taboo object is. So if the taboo object is UFOs, you should not say anything about them. You should not do anything about them. And God forbid you experience them. Right. And the reason that taboo exists is there is an element in which there's an impulse that it's trying to protect. Right. So we think of there's no taboo that you shouldn't put your hand on a hot stove. We just say you shouldn't put your hand on a hot stove. And someone goes, yeah, that's right, because that could burn you. That's the end of the conversation. There's no taboo about it because there's no impulse, generally, if you're healthy, to put your hand on a hot stove. Okay. So the fact that there's a taboo about something tells us there's some kind of impulse that we're trying to control. So there must be an impulse around looking up in the sky, looking into the water, and asking ourselves the question, what is this thing that we don't understand? It seems like a reasonable impulse.
Mm-hmm.
The reason there's a taboo around it is the fear, and I believe it's a dysfunctional fear because it doesn't actually work to motivate behavior that makes you feel safe. The dysfunctional fear that if you do say, do, or experience that thing, a UAP, that it will hurt you in some way. Right? Whether the UAP itself will hurt you or whether the experience of it will hurt you, or whether the experience of realizing you don't know everything or you're not in control will hurt you. And I think it's the last part that's really the hardest for people. We teach that to each other. In school, I'm a scientist, so I'm going to trace it to how science is taught, but it's through everything, right?
Yeah, nurture versus nature, or is this just, societal? Like, are we taught these things from a ground level as
We are
kids? Yeah.
clearly taught these things from a ground level because there are cultures in which you don't have that taboo, you have other taboos. So there are cultures, if we go down the road of taboo, we could talk about how it's actually helpful. Like when you have a desire, someone might have a desire to have sex with someone who's walking down the street, and there's a taboo against just walking up to them and having sex with them, right?
I
We
hope
would
so.
laugh. Right. Yeah, we would hope. And
Right.
so we feel like, oh, that's a useful taboo. Well, actually, I would argue no taboo is useful. It would be better to say, um, there, of course, everyone has an impulse for sexual activity. We are beings that are, we reproduce by sex. We're going to have that impulse. And this is how we're going to deal with it. And it can feel overwhelming. And this is how we manage those emotions, right? So it's a shift from secret taboo that actually kind of makes it stronger and creates a dysfunctional fear or feeds on dysfunctional fear to matter of fact, like you're a human being, you know, this is the nature of biology. And and what we do is we don't just jump on someone when we want to have sex with them. What we do is we learn how to manage those feelings, right? So it's a step towards emotional maturity. And I think we could do the same thing here. I think it's totally nurture. I think our country is becoming much less concerned about the taboo around UAP than some other countries. Like in Europe, there's still a little bit of concern about UAP. It's interesting because in Europe, there's less concern about psychic research. In the US, there's more concern about it's more taboo. So these cultures are independently sorting out what they think is okay, what they think is not okay. But the central taboo is to admit that we don't have control over what's going on in the world and that we don't actually understand it. That's, I believe, to be the central taboo. Thou shalt not mention that you don't have control.
Right, exactly, because it's scary. We look
Yeah,
at culturally and even just within the military complex and the American government, and I'll even say the Canadian government because I'm Canadian, but looking at both North American structures, the first thing they don't want to say is we don't have control, right? And
right.
the fear of not being in control. And I know within you break this down within your research and your presentation at SCU, talking about control and how we view it and how the mechanism can affect us. That is the outcome of fear for sure. And we see that and we see it multiply across all different cultures.
Yeah.
And I think with North American culture, we look at hopefully there is a rise and maybe through social media and other things, but we're creating hopefully a place for more self-awareness and understanding. But I know there are mechanisms within media and with the government that stop that use taboo to be able to create that fear so that we can't self-transcend or evolve to have better understanding of self and our environment around us.
Yeah, and I don't want to say that that's a conspiracy because I think that certain
For
groups
sure.
have, especially in the UAP field, of course, because there have been all these, black projects and stuff, can feel like it's a conspiracy to oppress or to misinform or disinform. And instead, I think it's people just doing what they do when they're scared and dealing with dysfunctional fear. It's just a bunch of humans like, what do we do? And then this one group says, I know we'll do this. We'll try to control things. And another group is like, we're going to control other things. But the underlying assumption that control actually keeps you safe is actually an untested one and probably wrong. It, right? I mean, we come from these environments when we're kids where we have this fantasy. Virtually everyone has had the fantasy when they're a kid. When I grow up, I'm not going to do things this way. I'm going to make sure my environment is this other way. I'm going to control what happens because I'll be an adult and I'll be in control. And what happens is you grow up and you realize, whoops, most of the things that truly affect our lives, like who we meet and end up marrying, where we work, these are usually accidents that occur somehow. You meet someone at a bar or you're walking down the street and someone's refrigerator, falls out the window and your friend is dead. And then you get to know the person whose refrigerator it was and you learn to forgive them. I mean, all sorts of stories about dramatic life changes that occur as a result of things that we don't understand, the calculations of the universe, I like to call them. So if we really want to be safe, we should ask the question, does being in control make us more safe? Or does it make us more safe to know that we're not in control, but to find out how to be part or like democratically part of the calculations of the universe? And I think that's the message that UAP, regardless of their source, are giving, the messages that they are giving us are around. How can we be part of the calculations of the universe and let go of this desire to, and in fact, faulty conclusion that we're going to be more safe if we're in control. So I just want to say one more word
Yeah.
about the idea that you're more safe if you're in control. If you are the smartest person in the universe or the smartest being in the universe, that means you can potentially calculate everything that's going on in the universe. And then maybe you should have control, right? And maybe it would be great if you had control because you can calculate everything. And maybe you're smart enough to figure out that good should triumph over evil, and you can figure all that out. But everyone else is not going to have control because you have this control, right? It's centralized. Another way to think about it is decentralized control, right? Each of us can get in touch with how we can bring our goodness and our love to the universe. Each of us can provide this unique piece of the calculation, and yet we don't have control over what happens to it, right? And that's okay. It's like a flower in the garden. It tries to be the best flower that it can with what it's got, right? And it doesn't have control. If someone comes along and says, well, this would be beautiful for my bouquet because it's been working so hard, snip, right?
Yeah, and I hear the word that's like coming in my head and saying multiple times to me is surrender, right? I'm hearing the word surrender. I think because surrendering is still a form, and maybe I'm wrong, we can discuss this, but surrendering is a form of its own self-control. It
Yes.
takes a lot to surrender. It takes a lot to be able to let go and trust and feel through those experiences well knowing. But I think we don't do a lot of that act. We feel that we have to control everything rather surrendering to those moments in conjunction with the UFO field. Some people, I would say, surrender, and we could get into multiple different subjects from abduction is a way of surrender. There could be multiple conversations to that. But I think in the research, what we do within the science community is we don't always surrender to having some understanding and let it be what it is. Instead,
Mhm.
we have to control it because it is fear. What do you think in conjunction with the concept of surrendering and control?
Yeah, I think that we tend to, like, I'm just imagining someone listening to this podcast. I'm involved, in conversations with the intelligence community, the military community, just peripherally and through friends, right? Um, and I'm imagining them listening and saying, surrender. Like, there's all sorts of bad stuff out there. We're not going to surrender to it. And I would say, think of a different definition of surrender. It's
Right.
not like, oh, the bad monster's coming and all I need to do is surrender, right? That's not a time when the surrender discipline needs to emerge, right? So there's also wisdom about when the surrender discipline emerges. And I agree that it's a discipline. It's absolutely a strength and a discipline. Um, so when the surrender discipline needs to emerge is when you're in a state of unknowing and needing an understanding of the next step. And you're not surrendering to sort of some enemy. You're not surrendering to some apparent evil. You're surrendering to the wisdom that can come to you when you allow yourself to not know, right? So you are in student mind, you're in a discovery space. So you surrender to that wisdom that allows you to figure out your next step. Your next step could be to fight UAPs or whatever, right? I don't know what your next step is, right? But but to be in that place of not knowing so that the knowing, so that the wisdom can come in. So it's a spiritual act. It's a mental martial art. And um and it could be good to train in that, I think. Those who are working on this phenomenon and trying to understand it. That particular mental martial art could be very important.
Yeah, you speak about in the lecture self-transcendence, but you put it in conjunction with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I personally love a lot. I look at friends, my life, not saying that it's maybe fully right, but it does make sense. It makes sense that we have to progress and work. And I'll put an image of what the Maslow hierarchy of needs for people so they can see it. Um, and so in this video, but it makes sense that you start off, on the ground floor where you need safety and housing, and it keeps going upwards where you're able then to be able to come to a place where you can work on self-awareness. But I really love what you say is that transcendence is growing from the beginning of when we start finding a shelter and food all the way up to self-actualization or trying to be self-actualized because it's important through all of it. Now, you talk about the military in conjunction with this too, and how they use transcendence. I would almost rebuttal they don't, and that's why I would love to even dig a little deeper in this because from what I've seen within the military and people, they usually try to break down the system or people to then rebuild them up. I don't know how they're using then transcendence within that kind of Maslow hierarchy of needs. But I know that you see this from a different perspective. I'd love to know how you feel that the military is using transcendence to their best ability, and maybe not for our own as civilians.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the military, yes, this is a complicated problem to solve, and I don't totally understand it at all. And I have furthermore, little expertise to draw on. So this is just based on conversations. So ideally, you would ask both a general and you would ask someone in boot camp the same question, right? So this is sort of hand wavy. Okay. But my understanding from what I've seen and people I've talked with is that you have a particular problem to solve when you have a bunch of people that you need to train to join a team that's bigger than themselves and that could potentially kill them, right? Which is a different problem than a CEO who's leading a company of people who, might make more money if they get promoted, et cetera, who are basically, you could explain their whole time there by self-interest, right? You could. I mean, hopefully in the better companies, that's not it, but you could. In the military, self-interest is not going to get you anywhere, right? Your whole role is to be on this team and potentially sacrifice yourself for the good of something that hopefully you believe in. So there are steps to getting people to find out what they do believe in and see if they believe in what the team believes in and see if they're willing to sacrifice for that. And there are steps to retraining people because in this country, we don't teach self-transcendence. We don't teach interdependence. We have well, I shouldn't, that's such a blanket statement, but generally we're not so great at it. We need to be better at it. Let's just say that. So there's retraining that has to be done. And then people who have joined the military often come from families that have military backgrounds. And so they are looking often for that experience of something larger than themselves. And so the military also needs to give them that and something they can believe in because of their parents' legacy and their grandparents' legacy. So it's a unique problem set. And I think that I know that at least at the higher levels, they're aware of the concept of self-transcendence and how important it is to help people know that they're giving to something larger than themselves. But there's also growing awareness in the military of the individual and focus on people first, on well-being of soldiers, of airmen, guardians, Marines. There's seamen. There's growing awareness that you don't get to self-transcendence by completely ignoring the needs of the human, right? And that's good that that's evolving. I'm just going to say that, frame that in a positive light. I think that's really good that that's evolving.
I think it's so important that it's evolving. I've sat with a counterintelligence official once in a back of a car with another person that worked within two people that worked in intelligence. And I was sitting in the back with them and they were talking, and I won't say who these people are because I feel that this is a private conversation, but it was also something I feel is very important to share, but not to who they are. And I think that it's not relevant for who they are. But the feeling for them when they were working within the government, they said, with each other because they couldn't relate and the unconditional love was blocked for them, I would say, or it was a hierarchy of respect, right? I
Yeah.
can't connect with you the way that I want to connect with you. And now I can. We're not in this system. And I looked at you at one way because I was told to look at you like that. I was told to talk to you this way. And that's the way that I was brought up within this system, with this military system, to understand how I would connect with others. And he said, I was the same way. And I watched these two men come together and have this like real aha epiphany while showing that they care for each other, along with then understanding what happened to them was something that they don't agree with. So I sat on the back of the car and laughed. And I wish I was filming it because it was such a moment. And I said to them, I was like, well, why are we all fighting for transparency in the UFO topic? Why aren't we starting with just bringing down the concept of breaking people down within the military and fighting against that and using connection and understanding with each other to build that camaraderie instead of fear and taboo or anything else? And they both were like, yes, like you could see the passion like come out of them where they were like, yes, and how much it changed the way that they work within society and how they see themselves. And it was a really, as a Canadian, for sure, because our militaries are different, not extremely different, but different enough. It's not as strong that it was really amazing for me to watch these two men go through that experience together, and have a paradigm shift within their own world and community. So I think it's like you were saying, it's so important.
Mm. That's beautiful. I'd like to just tag on to that for a second. Two things. One is this is the amazing thing about the self-transcendence that the military ends up engendering in people, is that they go through something together that's rough. Part of the roughness is this breaking down part, right? And then they come out of it, and then they have these brothers. There's a lot of men, there's also sisters, right? But they have these folks who are connected to them with unconditional love because of what they've been through. And so taking that piece and magnifying that, sort of weaving that love back into the military to sort of break down some of these dysfunctional, I would say dysfunctional fear behaviors, and turn them into like a powerhouse for good in the world, that where there's love just rampant. I'm not talking about sexual love. I'm talking about unconditional love, brotherly love, sisterly love, that it's rampant, that's weaving love into the world. I mean, it would change the whole planet. And the other piece that you mentioned is it was these two men. And I don't think we talk enough about how the UAP field is largely dominated by men, and how the dynamics, as women, we watch men. So we know from the outside what the dynamics are. But men are often stuck in these power dynamics that they're unaware of. And of course, I'm sure women get stuck in things all the time that we don't see, right? Because we're in them. So, but watching those power dynamics, it makes me feel, ooh, the UAP field is going to shift men. Like this is about men shifting on the planet. I really do. I really think that. And I think that there's an important like historical moment where men will become open to more love that is strong, more surrender that is strong, more willingness to not know and bring their gifts to the world that is strong, that is strong. They could do it in a manly way, right?
Right, yeah,
Oh,
because
oh my God.
masculine and feminine, it's true, and I think the phenomenon makes you surrender. I think in some ways it asks you to surrender because of its unknowing. So you're at its whim, to be able to listen and to connect in some form with each other, and then along with each other and along with this phenomenon, right? And
Yeah.
how we view it. You literally led me into the question I was going to ask you is about gender and how our gender and how we perceive the phenomenon and how it's can be different through the lens of a male and female. How do you see that from your perspective? Because I see it in many different ways, being in this topic as a woman and reporting it and experiencing so many more things as a woman than I ever have in other fields, good and bad, in conjunction with this, because there are not many of us here. And I'm so thankful you are, and more women are getting involved in the UFO topic. But how do we perceive the phenomenon through our own gender lens?
That's such a good question. I think there needs to be a study on that. So all I can speak to is anecdotally what I've noticed, and I haven't even done enough research to almost open my mouth. Just honestly, like, so here's the superficial stuff that I think I know that I'm not sure that I know. I'm pretty confident that I don't know. How about that? Um, my sense is certainly there's a gender difference in how these are perceived and experienced, both perceived and experienced. So people will tell stories, a man and a woman who saw the same UFO will tell stories about, well, it looked like this. No, it looked like this. It was this color. No, it was this color. Like even at the perceptual level. The experience level, I think, is very, um, can be very different. And again, this is on average, this is anecdotal. No study has been done. Think of any caveat you want, and put it behind what I'm about to say. But I think that women are more likely to experience psychic effects from downloads or from telepathic communication or a feeling of calm or a feeling of fear or a feeling of whatever. I don't know, even know if they're more likely to experience it or more likely to talk about it. Men are more likely to either talk about or experience or both. There was a thing that was zipping by and it went at an odd angle, sort of the physical movements. Now, I partly think that's true because that's how we've decided to spend our money in the field, right? We've decided to, let's focus on the size and shape and the movements of these objects. We got to track the race cars because they're zipping around.
Fair.
And,
Yeah.
but in fact, um, what ends up mattering is the intention of this, whatever this is. And what matters to humanity is the intention. And that's an intention is a non-physical thing. It's an experienced thing. It's a psychic thing that you pick up on. But people will talk, both men and women, about, well, did you feel like they were, out to get you? Well, not really. Well, do you feel like they were showing off? Well, maybe. What do you think their intention was? I think it'd be really cool to do an intention study, and with respect to gender as well, with experiencers, and just simply ask, what do you think their intention is? Do a survey, you know? And I wonder if the genders will come out different or the same. I kind of suspect they might come out the same. Because at a basic level, while experience can be different and perception can be different, I think measurement of others' intentions, I don't know. We'll see. Have to do it. It's an empirical question.
Yeah, I think you bring out intentions and also men that are experiencers from an abduction perspective, or a close encounter to the fourth or fifth kind. Their empathy, I would hope, and I would have to survey this and see, would understand what it feels like to be a woman that is scared, in the fear
Yes.
of that, right?
Yes, I had a
Um,
conversation with an abductee who was a male, and he was saying, I felt like I knew what it was. I mean, he didn't say that until I said, that sounds like what it's like to be a woman. He says, I'm always scared. I'm always trying to, I'm like, yeah, it's like a woman.
yeah, we
Yeah.
are, it's you're scared that uh and this is not all the time. I think, to find in some, and for some women it is, and there's reasons for that. And for some people, for not even just women in general, there's reasons from that, from previous experiences that they feel all the time. I don't feel fear all the time, but I will be on high alert,
Yes.
to know what is
Yes.
around me.
Yes.
And we are so prone to be able to understand. That's why women are so good at identifying, or having that, intuition or listening to it, because it's one thing that has saved us. But I do feel in conjunction with the phenomenon, it's hopefully, someone shouldn't have to be abducted to go through a horrible or even positive experience for them to understand what it feels to be the other agenda, or the other gender. But I feel that if we hear these stories from others, we do need to look at it from that perspective, because we can learn so much more about each other and learn more about what it feels like and create more empathy, for someone else. And I do think the UFO topic for sure is for that, and for men and for women, right? I don't always just want, I don't want to hate on men, because I don't think that's it. But I think it is teaching them to grow those sides of surrendering, and what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes and what that might feel like potentially.
Well, yeah, and it's also, I think, bringing women out as experts in that area. So actually, women, people of color, people with disabilities, anyone who's been poor most of their life are all experts in knowing how to navigate when they're not in control of the dominant situation. And we are moving into a time in our country, in the US, where we are not, that we are part of two or now probably two worldwide forces, like us and China, basically.
For sure.
Right. And then maybe in the future, in the near future, India. I mean, so it's like we're no longer this unilateral, the most powerful nation on the planet anymore. And so we as a whole need to understand how to navigate when you don't feel like you're in control, how to manage up, as they say. We're going to have to manage up aliens or whatever's running the UFOs, right? We have to manage up. How are we going to do that? So I think women in general, on average, are learning, just like anyone who doesn't have sort of cultural power, is learning how to lead, how to have a voice and say, you know what, actually, I could contribute to this. Here's some things that we could not do, or here's some things that we can do that might actually help us manage up.
I agree with you. Outside of looking at gender, I love the topic of neurodiversity, and we spoke quickly about this in the car while we're driving to the airport. Have you dived into neurodiversity in connection with the UAP topic from a neurological perspective and a perception perspective? Because I've had experiences, and not even just, let's say, UFO related, but I've been in a room before where I felt something was unethical, and I was in a situation that I felt that was unethical, and there was other leaders in that space, and I was speaking up and saying, this isn't right. We shouldn't, I don't feel that this is ethical, and here's my reasons why. And so it was debated with a group of people, and being the only female lead within that group was having the conversation. And if someone's asking, this has nothing to do with the debrief, the team, because I'm the only woman there, and another project. And so for me, I thought was interesting. There was another man, and when we were done this project, and in the end, we ended up getting to debrief together and have a conversation. And he said to me, he felt the same thing I felt. He felt that there was unethical things happening, and my perception was very similar. And we talked about our experiences and what we saw and what we felt and why that happened, right? And he said to me at the end of it, but I need to tell you, I'm dyslexic. And I said to him, I'm dyslexic too. And he went, really? And I said, yeah, I had no idea you were dyslexic as well. But what I caught after I hung up the phone, what I caught there was that the two dyslexic people in the room, not saying nobody else did not think that this was unethical, but within the group of people that were making decisions, the two dyslexic people were very quick to call out the unethical work and say something to it. Not meaning that if you're neurodivergent, you're always going to say something, but I felt that it was interesting that two people perceived something different than how everybody else did and had a comment towards other people's actions. Do you see that a lot within neurodiversity? And do we even know why that happens? And also, do we see that within the UFO field when looking at it from a neurodiversity lens as well?
Yeah. Okay. So also good experiments to do that I haven't done,
I would love
but
to
I could.
join you on those one day.
I think it's very cool. Um, I just speaking specifically to dyslexia, I happen to know more about that because my son's dyslexic. And anyone who's a dyslexic person who goes on to be able to read and write and do well, like you, like my son, like this person you were speaking with. There was a beautiful study done that suggested that most of those people were originally placing their language in the left hemisphere, which is more analytical, and that's where most people put their language. But they learned to read by switching hemispheres because there's something up with that hemisphere. And they usually use their right, or a chunk of them will use their right hemisphere to read and to write. As a result, because the right hemisphere is really more focused on relationship, on intuition, on sensing the environment and really caring for the environment, making sure the environment is good contextually. and music, you have a bunch of people who are dyslexic who are really good at those skills. So there's that piece neurologically. There's also the piece socially as you're growing up and you realize you can't read and your friends can read. You have trouble with writing, your friends don't have trouble with writing. And you start to see how your brain is working as you learn to read and write, but it's working differently. You get used to the idea that you're a different kind of thinker. And so as you go up into adulthood, you start to notice if you're successful, wait a minute, this different kind of thinking is actually helping me out. And therefore you feel more confidence in speaking up because in the past you've noticed that you've been right. Right? Your different kind of thinking has given you useful information about the emotional relationship context of something or about music or whatever it is. And you're good at it. So you've also been trained to value that part of your skill. So broadening it now to all different neurodiversities, and frankly, I don't think there's such thing as neurotypical. I think everyone has something that is a little bit off, and that is the gift, right? This is this is the whole thing. This is the gift that they're offering. If everyone were the same, it would be redundant, and why have more than one person? So so in terms of neurodiversity, I'm excited to be part of a project called Cool Abilities, which was started by Vint Cerf, one of the founders of the internet, who still is an internet evangelist at Google. And he is advising us on this project, a small team of people. But we're trying to assess different neurodiverse traits and the superpowers or the cool abilities that come with them. So a good example was what we were just talking about with dyslexia. But there's autism, there's schizoaffective disorder, there's, anxiety disorders even, there's OCD. There are gifts that come with each of those, right? And more. And even if you don't have any disorder and you're lucky enough to not have been diagnosed with anything like that. So even for a person like me, there's these gifts. So with cool abilities, we want to assess these gifts and then create generative AI that can support bringing out these gifts on teams. So it'd be great to take that technology once we have it built and apply it to the UAP field. I think in the UAP field, you have incredible neurodiversity, and to harvest that often, at least in the non-governmental space and the non-corporate space, so people who are like UAP hobbyists, often those people have been beaten down in their lives and not felt like they had power, but they did have this gift, right? I just interviewed Larry Cates about his UAP experience, and he talked about how he's completely mathematical and he thinks about concepts visually, and he has an algebra of concepts, right? This is a gift. It's not your standard TV show person unless that person is Sheldon on Big Bang Theory, right? So how can we integrate that in the UAP community? I don't know. I would love to be a part of that.
I think so too. It'd be really wonderful to see how looking from research, right, and collecting data, understanding it, interviewing people, testimonies, being at sites, alleged sites, crash sites, talking to government officials. I do think if we stop just kind of putting everybody together and just saying kind of you do this and you do that, we look at their neurodivergency and say, this is where we feel that you would be best suited to help and to research and to contribute to this, but even to society on a whole. I look at the workforce, and for sure, corporate needs to change and the structure needs to change because not all companies embrace being neurodivergent. Sometimes they don't understand that it can be a superpower and where the skill is. And that's something that we have to teach each other, along with having time and understanding that people process information differently, and that sometimes our ideas or other people's ideas, they might not understand it, but there might be some forethinking that has come with it over time. I think you see that a lot. I think a lot of neurodivergent people that are maybe higher on the spectrum are thinking of the future, and we're seeing that. And later on, you find out, whoa, they were so advanced for their time. Not everybody, But I think there are a group of people for sure that have those abilities and can be great leaders in different spaces. But we do have to embrace our individuality and our differences. So I'm really excited for the work that you're doing. I can't wait to see that. And please share it with us with the debrief because we'd love to report on it as well. So
Cool. Thank you. Yeah,
yeah.
it's a great world for change right now.
So, my last question to you, Julia, is how do we go about changing fear and taboo and stigma? Because stigma is obviously a huge part of this. How do we go about doing that within the UFO topic to make it more embraced by the mainstream?
You know, I think we changed the goal. I think the goal of it being more embraced by the mainstream is sort of an old school goal. It's like when all media was centralized and there were only three channels that you could watch on TV, there would be a goal of getting whatever your story was onto one of those channels. Right? Things are very different now. So what is the mainstream now? Right? So I think the goal has to be different. I think the goal has to be about discovering where honest surrender to wisdom and truth and goodness and love, unconditional love, can take us. That seems like a good goal, right? And if it's on a good path, naturally more and more people will become interested just because it's on a good path. And there is an urge towards goodness in human beings. So people get inspired by goodness, right? And people want to be a part of it. So just be and do goodness, you know, use love, use faith, use hope, use wisdom. And you see what happens. I mean, look, you know, you will see what happens. It won't be a bad thing, right?
For sure.
Can't be a bad thing.
For sure.
So we just can't be in a hurry to like make everyone believe something. That doesn't work. I think it's the magnetic approach that you want.
I agree. And diving deep, I think, too, within ourselves, and understanding ourselves and who we are as people and how we operate in this world and how it reflects onto others too. I think it's always a good start. Maslow hierarchies of needs, more self-reflection. And nobody's perfect at it. And it's always ever evolving. You're always self-reflecting to the day you die. But I
Yeah,
think the more we have that, maybe we'll have a better understanding of the phenomenon too. So thank you
I do
so
too.
much, Julia. It's such a pleasure to have you. And as I say to all my guests, thank you so much for being rebelliously curious with me today.
My pleasure. What a delight.